Welcome to the CatNIP Show, a video show that brings you stories and interviews at the intersection of technology, culture, and play. I am your host, Jyoti Patel, principal of Spill LLC, where we create playful workshop experiences to disrupt the status quo. This week, sharing stories on the emerging autonomous vehicle industry. Welcome to the CatNIP Show, episode 5. Today, I'm really excited to have a special guest with me, Paula Bejarano. So Paula and I know each other from college. We both attended the University of Central Florida together. And that was what? I'm trying to think, Paula, like 04? We graduated in 2004.
I don't want to say it.
Are we dating ourselves?
Let's say a while back.
Yeah, but we're still 25.
We'll be 25 for a while.
And so, Paula, you've had a really interesting career since we graduated. I know you spent some time overseas in the Netherlands, and then you returned to the United States a few years ago now, where you completed your master's. You have 2 master's degrees, mechanical engineering and your MBA too.
Correct.
And I'm really excited for you having switched into the autonomous kind of industry and made that your area of specialty. So you spent some time at Tesla. Now you're in San Francisco, and you spent some time in Tesla.
Correct. Yeah.
And then also working for a venture capital firm, working with early stage startups, also in the autonomous field. And you've recently written a book. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm just going to flash it out to everybody.
How do you pronounce the name?
Amazon, if you
Yeah.
like to. It's I know I get so many questions about that. It's actually autonomosity, and it's funny because it was probably the easiest part about writing the book. Is a lot of people always struggle, make it impactful, and for me, just like it came, I think overnight. It's like I had an epiphany, probably.
Yeah.
Brush my teeth, and it was autonomous vehicles and curiosity for them put together. And it was, about emerging business models, just because it's an area that we haven't really looked at, the monetization of these really shiny, amazing pieces of technology. So
yeah,
I'll go more into detail about it.
No, that's really cool. Autonomosity. And not just the monetization, I'm really interested too in just how this emerging industry is going to change the shape of how we not just travel, but live. When you think about how integral
definitely.
Driving is to our lives every day.
That's correct. I actually, in part 4 in my book, I make an analogy to the airline industry, because in the 1900s, only, in the military, because of reasons of war, airplanes were used, but back in the day, there was no regulation. People died because there was no inspection of the airplanes. So you could do an analogy that we are at that point, that tipping point, where regulation will have to be set in place for autonomous vehicles, and it will change, so many things about transportation, the people that have accessibility to it, the way that monetize the auto manufacturing industry, how they're placing themselves now as mobility companies instead of just car making companies. So it definitely, I believe, is the next big shift in transportation. It's one of the reasons I'm very passionate about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, that is my first question. And I do want to kind of poke a little bit more into some of the implications of this technology. But before we go into the details, let's just start big. Like, tell me why you're so passionate about the autonomous industry, and how did you get into it? Like, tell me a little bit about what drives you to do this work.
So like you mentioned, we met at an engineering class or college, and I've always loved technology. When I was very little, back in Colombia, I wanted to be a rocket scientist, and that was my dream. When I got to school, I met you, and then I actually worked at NASA. It was like the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And then certain things happened. I moved to Europe, worked there, space technology, the energy industry, and at that point in my life, I felt like I needed more of a mission-driven career rather than just a career that maybe paid well.
Yeah. Purpose.
So then I decided,
you wanted purpose.
Exactly. Thank you. That's the right word. That was missing in my life. So that was before I was even thinking about autonomous vehicles. So I decided to go back to school, get my MBA, and get more into like entrepreneurship. And I started with the VC side, analyzing the technology. That's how I learned about, LiDAR or perception stack or operating systems, radar. So all the technology components that go into an autonomous vehicle. And from there, obviously, I got introduced to Tesla, working at the plant in Fremont, and walking through the plant every day and almost running into Elon Musk by pure coincidence, and seeing the car drive itself. The M3, the prototype. I don't know. It was just like it all came together, and having a technology background also with business education, it felt like that was the right path for me. And it's like you said, it's a purpose career, I would say. Like, this is something that would affect society. Hopefully, I would like to say in a very positive manner. Autonomous vehicles will be useful when it's at mass scale, to give people access to transportation. People that they're too far to commute into the city, or Uber doesn't work because it's areas that maybe they're low socioeconomically standing, or communities where older citizens, they can't really drive themselves. So nowadays there's shuttle pilots on those kind of areas. So you see how the technology is permeating into our everyday lives, but it could have a lot of really good impact towards the community. And I think sometimes we forget about that. Obviously, the deaths will go down.
The safety piece. Yeah, that's funny, because I've so often thought of it from the safety perspective as being one of the biggest advantages.
Yeah, so eventually when they're fully deployed and the technology is fully maturated in the market, that would be I think the major advantage, that we won't have drunk drivers. We won't have immature teenagers driving. We would have just like very intelligent pieces of technology driving us.
It's really cool, because there's so many. I didn't have the number in my head, but the number of people who die or get seriously injured.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I can't have it in my head right now, but exactly, that's the major point, right?
Yeah, and I think it just kind of eclipses a lot of the concerns people have about the technology maturing, and maybe some, I know there was an incident last year with an accident down, I think, in Arizona.
Yeah, the Uber car that I was involved in this lady's crash, when she was crossing the street, and the car didn't stop. So there's a lot of speculation why it didn't.
But that kind of thing is dramatic, but it doesn't kind of compare to the potential, benefits.
The benefits. But we have to understand that we still, 5 years ago, the technology behind an artificial brain for a car, it didn't exist. Like deep neural networks, machine learning. This is all very new, abstract concepts back in the day. You didn't, companies weren't looking at resumes and looking for, Python programming or machine learning experience. Nowadays, that's a huge part of, talent recruitment, at least in the Bay Area.
Yeah, so, here in Seattle too.
Yeah, exactly. I think just about any company, right? So I feel like we still are a fairly nascent stage of the technology, but we have to keep developing, and unfortunately accidents have happened, but it just goes back to companies being conscious and responsible, taking accountability of the way they deploy their systems. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, I think it happened, unfortunately, but it also gave kind of like a reason for companies and regulators to rethink the way they're approaching their safety systems. So the lessons learned behind it's like, hopefully, people are being more cautious and more responsible about what they're letting out of their garages or their manufacturing lines. So
let me ask you a question. So, I've been listening to a few podcasts about some emerging technologies, and one of the concepts that I've been hearing about is this term explainability, with the rise of machine learning and deep learning. This notion of being able to explain the like why behind a lot of our algorithms. And as we get, you know, like exposed to increasing regulations and potentially like post any kind of accident or incident where something goes wrong, we have to have the ability to be able to explain like why do our systems make decisions the way they do. And I've heard that it's one of the biggest like potential barriers to this, like to technology being
definitely
used effectively. Like how does that work within the automotive industry or the autonomous automotive industry? Like tell me about how do you see people considering that in the companies that you've worked for, or the people that you've interviewed for your book?
Yeah, so I feel like so accountability is very big in terms of like, of course, it's, you know, it should be a principal industry, right? We should be able to be conscious and responsible for the systems that are put out for public to use. I believe this whole data, there's a huge conversation or dilemma about, okay, how much data do you keep? Because basically you're training a computer, and the computer learns by itself. This is all like, you know, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and it goes out in the world, and based on its training, it acts, right? It behaves. But this goes back to having a deterministic model or algorithm, which is something that you will always know the outcome. So 1 + 1 is 2. But then if you have probabilistic algorithm, then you would go by probability. So that the system thinks that, you know, 90% of the time is right. It's the object crossing the street is a kid versus a plastic bag. Okay. So then it goes on telling you how it thinks and how it reacts based on like the input that it gets from the lidar, from the computer, from the camera as well. So it's about judgment rather than, you know, having like an ultimate decision. So there's a lot of simulation that's going on right now. And in terms of liability, if an accident happens, how do you demonstrate to NHTSA, which is the official regulatory body for the automotive industry? How do you demonstrate that your car is going to be safety will perform as the standards that we have today? So that's still a huge issue. So for instance, I was looking at a couple of courses and also some material from Andrew Ng. He was one of the biggest AI heads in Google. He runs his own like deep learning AI company. And he was saying, for instance, you look at the radiology or at the X-ray industry, before the AI used to say, oh, I scanned this person's lung, you know, through an X-ray, and it says that it might have cancer. There's a 90%. And people say, okay, if you look at the X-ray, it's black and white, but you don't understand the machine, why the machine is thinking that. But the way they explaining it in that sense is because now they have a color coding. So then you have an X-ray, but it has a heat map. So it tells you this area, you know, is more likely to have certain cells or cancer in nature. This area doesn't, but because when you aggregate the data, then it gives you 95, 99% of that person having cancer in their lungs. So that goes to tell you how some industries are tackle explainability. I would think there's something that we could do in the automotive industry at the same time that could be like that. The only problem there is that when you're on a road, you have to think, you know, when you're driving and you see a person, you know, crossing the street, you automatically brake, right? You don't have to like, your eyes don't have to like process the data, send it to your brain. Your brain has to like remember its training and like react and send a signal to the mechanical control of the car for braking. So that whole like process has a latency and a probability error when it comes to that. So I think I'm going really technical on this, but that I can say the issue of like responding right away rather than having validation from the human. There is also technology right now, or companies that are doing remote operation of autonomous vehicle cars. So they will have a person, I don't know, a couple of miles down the road that sits at a data center, and they will be checking and monitoring the car, but that would be the exception-based monitoring. So something like there's a construction up ahead, or, you know, there's a police car behind me. Like, it won't be 24/7, but that would also play a part into like how the AI would, you know, the AI or the car would behave in an autonomous manner.
Cool. So like a system,
question that was very long.
No, that's really good. So just like the system of checks and balances, in addition to ways that we can highlight how the algorithms are deciding.
Exactly.
So, cool. Super interesting. All right, so what's our next question? So you, for your book, you did a lot of research and you interviewed a lot of different companies that are working on this technology. And so my next question is, you know, of all the folks that you spoke to that work in this industry, what are some of the stories that you may have heard that were just interesting or surprising, just noteworthy? Like share some real life stories.
So many. Yeah, I was like, I chuckle as I read it. I was like, oh my God, this is really good material. Okay, so my first story I have is from one of the tier 2 or tier 1s. These are the vendors for the auto manufacturing companies. It's this particular company is autonomous stuff. So my friend Cameron Gitas, he's the technical sales manager for the West Coast region, and he was telling me about, you know, the dilemma about data, what we had spoke about before. Like, as you train these algorithms and you test them out in the field, you're gonna acquire a lot of data. So you start with giga, then you peta, hexa. Well, there's all these like magnitudes of orders, just keep it expanding. And the idea is to put them in the cloud. But of course, the cloud may not be reliable enough in terms of liability. Something happens, you have to show it to certain official agencies
for record keeping requirements.
Yeah, exactly. So what he was telling me is that the data nowadays is being recorded in these magnetic tapes, which is the same as your cassette that you used to use in your or play in your car. Or I used to tape songs from the radio on them. Like, when I was very, very young.
Yeah, so I'm way too young to even know what that is. You know,
interesting concepts. We have just, and then they go back to tapes. I didn't feel so old out there. But yeah, it just goes to tell you how the industry, it still remains very scrappy. Maybe eventually they'll find a more sophisticated way to do it. But that really resonated with me. The second story that I have, it's more on the startup side. Talking about scrappy, I guess. And as what I've seen from startups and startup founders that I've interviewed for my book, they're not going to compete with the Waymos or the Ubers of the self-driving ecosystem. Obviously, they can't for resources and various reasons. So they gotta find their own niche. They gotta find their own customers. And this particular company, this head of business development at the time that I spoke with from Mighty AI, what they do is they have a crowdsourcing model to label data for training algorithms. So basically what you do, you and I could go tomorrow, go to the Apple Store, the iOS App Store, download an app, and the app will just give you pictures of a house, a car, a tree, and what you do is just outline those, and you mark it as a car or as a person, and you get paid for that.
Okay.
And that is the training data that these huge companies, IBM, Microsoft, need to train the machine learning algorithm to tell it, hey, somebody said that was a car or a house, so therefore it's okay. And then they could run off and they do the more sophisticated part of the algorithm training, or test if that's actually validate if that's what the machine thinks it is. I mean, they are being very successful so far. I think they're 5 years old or so, because they are bringing their customers, cheaper data that's available faster. So, there is a space for the market solutions for that. So I thought that was a very interesting thing.
That is really interesting. And I think I quite like that idea, because if you think about the sources of the data that we're using to train like our machines and our algorithms, I feel like the larger data set you have and the more diverse data sets that you have, the better. And so I don't know the data sets that some of these, research institutions would use, but I feel like the more that could be subbed out to a third party, maybe exactly. That, you know, we could have more oversight as to making sure we have really diverse people contributing, so that, you know, we're training our algorithms off of the most widest expanse of potential situations and perspectives. So
I believe that's true. And if you find ways that it could be done faster and cheaper, and that whatever could be done, obviously in a responsible, safe manner, to deploy the technology on the road will be better for bigger companies anyways.
Yeah.
I think that's the way they're looking at it. So
that's cool. I guess data is the new currency, huh?
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
And then I had a third story.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah. So this was I thought also it's cute. Actually, I thought it was quite hilarious. This is how I open it, one of my chapters with it. So I, you know, being out in Silicon Valley, I attended during the research for the book. I attended so many talks and, you know, just workshops, and it's such an amazing, a stimulating environment for that. And I attended last year this talk by these two gentlemen at the Society of Automotive Engineers Innovation Day, and out in San Jose in California. And one was from Dell, who used to, you know, make computers, but now they're working on self-driving technology, and Altron, which is this other European engineering company, multinational. And they're telling me how, you know, they together they built this, or they worked on this very highly sophisticated autonomous vehicle car, the one that you see driving out here in San Francisco or in Arizona. I don't know if they have them in Seattle yet. They have the, you know, the LiDAR on top, their radars, the cameras. So they ship it to Australia, I think the Outback, and they were getting some bad feedback. Like the car kept, like, you know, the self-driving brain, the operating system kept like tripping, and they didn't, you know, and the folks in Europe didn't understand why. So then they finally had a chat with, you know, whoever was deploying it out in Australia, in the Outbacks and the roads. There's not that many people, you know, and a lot of traffic. It's just open road. Like, what can they? So apparently the car had been designed, you know, in a Western Europe / America setting mindset, and there's a lot of kangaroos crossing the street often in the Outback. And if you think about it, a kangaroo is not, it's not a person, but I mean, it's the height of a person.
That's
it's
right.
not a dog, but it's fluffy. So the self-driving machine is like, I have no idea. So it would just stop. I'm assuming that's what it will do. Like, and it's so funny when they said that. I was like, wow. I guess nobody would think about a kangaroo crossing the street daily. It's a pedestrian kangaroo, you can think about it.
Yeah.
But on a more serious note, it tells you also about culture within a company, big and small. That and I remember this from grad school, that our professors, I would say, like, you know, you have to think about a global aspect. Like right now we sit at this globalization of industries, because you have to be aware of all the innovation happening across, you know, across markets, and, you know, China coming, and obviously things that are happening in Europe and the US and other areas. But you have to also think locally. So like we call it local, kind of like a new term, because your market, the market that you're targeting is so important as a customer. And that's a great example, right? Like, obviously you think about autonomous vehicles catering for the whole world, and you want to be super innovative and aware, but at the same time, every market, every targeted segment will have its own needs around its own customization. Anyways, that was kind of interesting.
That's really funny. I keep thinking about maybe an app where people can draw the outline of a kangaroo.
Yes, you can go and knock yourself out. It's my next revenue channel. Disclaimer, I don't think you'll get rich with it, but it'll be interesting. Instead of Candy Crushing, I think that's how the idea came from, because people play Candy Crush all the time. I think that's the name of the game, I'm not sure. And the CEO was like, hey, you know, make that time more useful, purposeful, and also maybe I'll make you some money on the side.
Yeah, that is so funny. No, that's really good. I like it. Glocal. I'm going to add that to my vocabulary list.
Definitely.
So we have one quick game we're going to play before we close, and it's a card game. So what I have here are a set of cards that were designed by the company Artefact, which is a design firm out of Seattle, and they created the tarot cards of tech. I'll show it right there. And the tarot cards of tech helps creators of all kinds consider the impact of technology. And so there's basically all of these different characters on these cards, and on the back of each one there are questions to help us dive into some of the implications of various technologies. So I have 5 of them picked out, and I want you to choose a number.
Pretty colors.
I know.
The images are very interesting too. Okay, maybe, I love the puppy. Okay, the service dog, because they're so cute.
The service dog, the smash hit, the catalyst.
The catalyst, ooh, that sounds very...
The radio star.
I don't know if I'm ready to start.
And the big bad wolf. So you can either choose the one you want, or you can tell me a number, like whatever you want to do. Which one?
I think I'll go for the purple one with the little service dog.
The service dog? Let's do it. So the question on the back of the service dog card is, if your product was entirely dedicated to empowering the lives of an underserved population, what kind of impact could you make?
So what, okay, so the question is like what the impact that would be of the product, I guess we call it autonomous vehicles,
yes,
on a specific underserved community, or is that the...
Yeah, and we kind of talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the interview, where you talked about the ability to make a social impact. So let's maybe tell me a little bit more about what that looks like. Like, let's imagine this particular population that's underserved. Like, how could you imagine their daily lives changing, and not just through the technology, but the impact, the ripple effect of this technology, or the access to this technology on their lives? Like, what would that look like? Paint a picture.
So, for instance, say San Francisco, I think is one of the most expensive cities in the US. San Francisco, before the big tech scene used to be like a lot of artists and like a lot of like free thinkers, and unfortunately, because of the tech bubble has inflated, the real estate, the cost of living. A lot of these people have to leave the city, right? But not only those particular like art-oriented people, but also the people the people on like service economy, like people that work at kitchens, or that clean. They can't afford to live in the city.
Yes.
But obviously all the business is in the city.
Right.
Because you think about it, the Bay Area is extremely condensed. The South Bay and the East Bay, and there's tech everywhere. So they have to keep going farther and farther from the urban ring. And then they will have to, by the time you take like a train, because I do it every day. I commute from San Francisco to Mountain View, and my whole life, Monday through Friday, is determined by the train table. But, I can afford a train, but the train is, it's probably like almost $20 per day. Imagine that for a person who doesn't have, who maybe didn't go to college, or, I don't know how people do it sometimes. So then, what if you think about autonomous technology, maybe not an ownership model, but more of a user model, where you have these ride-sharing fleets that are, I wouldn't say geostationary, but no, geospace, like constrained. So they have one route. It could be a bus. They take 15, 20 people from like 20, 50 miles outside the perimeter from the city in and out daily. And because it's a crowdsourcing thing, you don't pay as much, obviously, so that the cost would be less. So imagine if like their commute expenses would be reduced. Also, we talk about carpooling lanes. So here in the Bay, if you have couple carpooling lanes where you could if you drive with 2 or 3 people, you could just go on this lane. It's like the Autobahn, like you just go. And then also there are certain bridges that either is a reduced rate for the toll, or there's no toll at all. So you also think about that expense being removed from the equation. So I believe that people could have better lives, because even they could, they don't have to spend as much in transportation, or they could find better jobs because they're more accessible to, to like mobility that could give them, like access to other areas in the Bay as well. So I believe in that aspect, it would be also very beneficiary also in areas that perhaps an Uber wouldn't want to go because it's dangerous, because it's like somewhere probably like, or people don't have the technology, don't have smartphones to, have an Uber app or a credit card, whatever. These autonomous vehicles, they don't care if they are, if the neighborhood is not pretty, or if the customer is not very high tech oriented, they just drive people for it. It's a machine, right? There's no like consciousness, supposedly. So for those families that live in this like low income, perhaps, not so fancy neighborhoods, kids that want to go to school in like better neighborhoods, obviously, or those, those families that have to transport themselves, but the bus or the Uber doesn't go to their house, then they have like a whole world of opportunities that, present themselves to them. So I think it's also that socioeconomic shift that an autonomous vehicle will provide eventually. And I think it's also the responsibility of like regulators as much as the market to make sure that the technology is being deployed in a responsible manner. It's not just like, oh my gosh, it's really cool technology, let's just saturate the market with it because it's just cool. No, there's got to be a responsible and like a benefit to everybody across the spectrum. So that's the idea. I'm kind of my idealist.
Yeah, no, I really like that, And I think the fact that it's such a new space, like, I have to hope that it will be less of a monopoly than, than I would think. Like, I really hope that Uber is not going to be the only sheriff in town, because
so
the more competition there is, I think the more it will drive down the cost, and then the more it would benefit like underserved populations. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about time. Like for me, time is probably the biggest benefit. Like how much time does it take to get on the train,
it's the biggest, like you say, currency.
It's another one, right? So people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, time is even more valuable because sometimes they might be working an extra job, or they have kids depending on them, also dropping off, picking up. So so hopefully that will help lift up some people, and just the mobility will enable them to be just more available for other parts of their lives.
Yeah, I think you won't see it right away. Obviously, you have the obvious cases like another Lyft or Waymo coming up with a ride-sharing fleet. But as this scales in a larger scenario, that's where we should be focusing on it, and the regulation, catches up to the technology. Then that would be the next step, right? Like, how do you responsibly like enforce that the technology is available to like a wider audience?
And that's really good. Thank you.
Welcome.
It's exciting stuff. I can see.
I could talk for hours. It's funny because I don't get tired. I think it's sometimes I go into like my own little soliloquy, and I'm like, okay, I need to stop because I'm losing people. So, but yeah, I'm writing a blog every week, and in conjunction to my book publication, and I dive deeper into this.
That's awesome. So if anyone's interested in getting in touch with you, what's your like website or social media handles? Just
so you could find me in LinkedIn under Paula Bejarano, or you can send me an email at Bejarano, a middle initial, paula@gmail.com as well.
Okay, great.
So, thank you.
Well, Paula, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you today. Really fun, and just I wish you the best with with your book and all of the great work that you're doing. So
thank you. It's been great. I love, your whole podcast effort and combining innovation, technology, and culture. I think it's so important. They say culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes, they do.
So I see it coming from a corporate world into like a startup ecosystem right now. I totally agree that it could be very powerful if executed the right way.
Yeah, no, it's true, and I think it's so competitive out there. When you think about disrupting the status quo, there's a lot of psychological safety that's needed for a team or for an organization or a group of people to be able to put themselves out there and challenge the norms that we've accepted for so long. And so you're right, culture does eat strategy for breakfast, but strategy is important too. You need both.
Definitely.
But yeah, so thank you again. And we'll share this. And if people need to get a hold of you, we'll invite them to do that. And wish you the best, Paula.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care. Okay, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.